Welcome to Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Saturday, December 21st. I'm your host, Tom Orr. It is the day you've all been waiting for. The Tennessee game is today. A real-life, honest-to-goodness college football game in Ohio Stadium coming up a little later on tonight. The game against Michigan, well, that's 343 days away. We'll worry about that later. Today, we got to talk about Tennessee. We're going to be doing that with our buddy Ross Fulton, the X's and O's guru at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And when Ross is on the show, we're sponsored by Jeff Ruby's of Columbus, proudly offering nationally acclaimed USDA prime steaks, seafood and sushi, impeccable service, live entertainment, and an attention to detail that is simply unmatched. Just go to jeffruby.com/Columbus to check out the menu and make a reservation for today. All right, so we're going to do what we did earlier in the week because this feels like one where we're just going to have a little bit more of a broad conversation about what to expect. This is going to be looking at the Ohio State defense and the Tennessee offense. We're not doing clips like we do. We'll do probably that as a review show after the game. But today, I just want to have a broader conversation with Ross about all this stuff. One of the things I wanted to start with here, earlier in the week, there was a question at one of Josh Heupel's press conferences about, is his offense an air raid offense? And, where is he on the air raid tree? Is he on the tree at all? Is this not an air raid offense? So, Ross, I know he's got some Art Briles ties, but, is this an air raid offense? If not, where, what is it, and does it even matter?
Yeah, exactly. What are words? I do not think of it as an air raid offense because of the limitations of the route tree due to the wide splits. We can get into that. Like, when I think air raid, I think of Hal Mumme, Mike Leach, and what has come from that. And a lot of the plays out of an air raid system were like mesh, shallow crosses and things of that nature. And Tennessee does not run that. Like, I just think of this as like pretty much pure Art Briles. And everything is like with the wide receivers, like spread out wide, everything, a lot of choice routes, right? Like guys are deciding whether, it's all like vertical stems. And by that, I mean, they're like going straight north and south and deciding whether to keep going vertically or come back and run a comeback route. And the quarterback's reading that. So it's its own unique Art Briles thing that Josh Heupel has taken to Tennessee.
And you mentioned some of the unique stuff that they do. And this is a Tennessee offense that just you turn on a game and you're like, well, that's different. And, the wide splits are certainly the first thing you're going to notice. They have wide receivers lined up outside the numbers on both sides of the field. That's something you really don't see almost anywhere else in college football. So that's one of the unique things. But they do a bunch of other stuff. They will run a decent amount of tempo, not constantly, but they'll do a decent amount of that stuff. But what other stuff are kind of the signature things that you can be kind of keep an eye out for from the Tennessee offense on Saturday night?
Yeah, I mean, you obviously have to start with the wide receiver splits. As you said, they put them outside the numbers. That obviously spreads out the defense, right? And the goal with that is to get the ball in space and count on the defense missing tackles. The down, and that's where tempo fits into, right? Like if you can't get lined up, can't fit the run correctly, they want to spread it out, and they want to run it and run, a ton of reliefs and RPOs with that run game that we can get into. But there is a downside that I just touched on with the wide receivers being spread out so wide, is it really limits the passing game. It is not an NFL style pass game where you're using space and progressions. As I said, it's pretty limited to, vertical stem routes. They'll run some quick game. Like you'll get some slants, obviously like the RPO stuff, but it's really like choice routes. And it's all predicated, as I said, off of people counting on the defense to make mistakes, whether that's an alignment, getting lined up, as I said, missing tackles, not being in the right spots. And so it's, I don't want to sound like pejorative, like, if it's not NFL, it's more, simplistic than that, but it is not what you would see, as I said, on Sundays, like as a passing game. There's just not that bevy of concepts. Instead, it's, as I said, those vertical routes and then, RPOs and heavy play action.
And you mentioned to me before we started that something that I hadn't thought about or really heard anyone else talking about this week in terms of those wide splits. Like we've talked a bunch about what do they do, but those can actually, in your mind, maybe limit them in some ways in some of the options they have in terms of downfield passing.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As I was just saying, I mean, it just makes it, there's less things that you have to worry about in terms of like, if you think about a route tree, right? Where all the different ways a wide receiver, obviously if you're spread out that wide, you can't, it's hard to run out routes to begin with. There's no out to go to, right? So you pretty much have to run, comeback routes. As I said, they'll run go routes, comeback routes. And as I said, not a lot of like, they won't run like shallow crosses, for instance, or like Y over, another air raid staple. That's why to me it's like not air raid, because you're not, the air raid really came from sort of like taking the Don Coryell system, Lavelle Edwards at BYU, and like adapting that to be more like pass all the time. This is just a very much like, we are going to count on the defense, as I said, making mistakes. Like we're going to run it when they don't get lined up or they're spread out too far. We're going to hit those vertical routes. If you play off coverage, comeback routes, and count on the cornerback missing the tackle, then we'll use a lot of play action to try to create explosives. And so it is both a test for the defense in terms of defending the entire field, but also self-limiting in some ways, right? Like you're going to get the inside run game and outside passing off of it, essentially. And, it does dictate, and we can get into this a little bit, like how teams defend them. You see a lot of similarities, but as I said, like you kind of know what you're getting.
Well, one of the similarities in how a lot of teams choose to defend Tennessee is the use of odd fronts. And that is not something that Ohio State has had a whole heck of a lot of over the years. And that's changed some this year. They're kind of dipping their toe into that a little bit more than they have in the past. But, has everyone played Tennessee with an odd front that you've watched? And, why? Number one, why? And number two, what does that mean for Ohio State? And if they're going to try and play 4 down?
Yeah, I mean, this will be fascinating to me because it is difficult if you go through this season to find defenses using an even 4 down front against them. It's just so much odd front. Now, part of that obviously is a lot of the teams that they play in the SEC run a lot of odd front anyways, like, Georgia, like a lot of that Nick Saban, lineage has spread throughout the SEC, particularly with whether it's at Arkansas or at, obviously with Kirby Smart playing the mid front. So it's some of that, but the reason for it goes back to those wide splits, right? So like they want to run reliefs, and we talked about with Marshall, like where are RPOs really effective? Like if you have linebackers in conflict. So like if your linebacker is like out wide because they have to account for the RPO, but then they also have to fill an interior run gap, you're in trouble. And so the odd front helps with that, because if you put 3 defensive linemen in those like A and B gaps, right, inside the guards in the center, then you're just widening out the gaps that the linebackers have to fill. And so then they can tread water and sit on the reliefs and then fill from depth, and the defensive line can spill the ball. So I'm personally fascinated to see what Jim Knowles does with this. I mean, maybe they pull out an odd front. I don't know. They've had some time. As you said, like it's in the playbook. We haven't seen them do it with the starters at all this year. I could also see some sort of variation akin to what they did against Indiana, where they used a lot of those A gap blitzes to essentially like create a bare front with the linebacker. But again, that doesn't necessarily solve the conflict issue for the other linebacker, right? Now, Indiana was obviously a heavy RPO team as well. And so, I do expect, like, coverage-wise, a lot of what we saw against Indiana. We can get into that a little bit, but, like, that'll be the first thing I'm looking for is, like, how do they line up front against Tennessee?
All right, I do want to get back to the RPOs in a minute, but let's talk first about those coverages that you were just mentioning. What are you expecting from Ohio State?
Yeah, and so I would like probably the first place I would look is the Indiana game, right? Where we talked about, a decent amount of those cover 4 match concepts. I expect a good chunk of the 3 high with Caleb Downs at the middle safety. See a lot of teams play Tennessee with the 3 high. Like Georgia did it quite a bit. Arkansas obviously bases out of that, but they had a lot of success doing it. One thing that it helps with is it muddies the reads for Nico on those reliefs. I thought that he got baited, particularly against Georgia, into pulling and throwing the wide receiver screens when it wasn't there because of like with the 3 high playing from depth, but then they could really just come downhill on those plays. And so what looked like a numbers advantage or space turned out not to be. And so you can just muddy the reads with the 3 high. So, I expect a bunch of that, a bunch of cover 4. As I said, like if they're going to play 4 down and play cover 4, I think you're going to have to do a lot of, whether you want to use the heavy technique we've talked about where the defensive end shoots inside, whether you want to just pinch or slant, again, to essentially like go from a 4 down front to capture some of those odd front principles because you just don't want to put them in your linebackers in such conflict. But I do think that I do think Nico can be baited into to throwing those reliefs when it's not really there. He's pretty trigger happy to pull and throw.
Yeah, and he's an interesting player because he's so talented and such an incredible athlete, but also young. I mean, this is his first year as a starter. And every time I watch him, I think this has very clearly always been the guy who is the most talented player on the field. And he feels like he always thinks I can fix this. No matter what the situation is, like I can outrun these guys. I can buy some time and I can use my incredible arm strength and just fire something downfield and like we'll make it work. I think I've watched 4 Tennessee games and maybe seen him throw the ball away like once. Now, I asked Sonny Styles about this earlier in the week, just the challenge that they may be facing in terms of if he gets out and they don't rush the passer and they don't have like discipline in the rush lanes, he can get out of the pocket. He can make a big play with his legs. You're also putting a lot of pressure on that Ohio State secondary to cover for, if you're not covering for 2.5 seconds, if he's scrambling around, maybe you're covering for 4.5 seconds, 5, whatever it is, that's a lot of pressure on the back end of the defense. To me, I look at him and it's like, he is going to make the big play for one team or another. He is going to make the big play of the game that's going to decide it. And it's just, which direction is it going to go? And I kind of shrug and go, I don't know, but it's going to be exciting to watch.
Yeah, I think part of it too is just, again, like a reflection of what their passing game is, right? Like it's like half field reads. So it's kind of like he'll 1-2 guys and then he's going to tuck and go. And, a lot of his throws are off of obviously RPOs or play action. I don't think there's just not a lot of intermediate stuff. I do think that Jim Knowles will bring pressure on passing downs. Kirby Smart, Georgia, like they really dialed it up on passing downs against him to get him off his spot and force him to move. A lot of like hot pressures where it's like bringing 6 and you're playing 3 deep, 2 under, and you're like counting again the space you're sort of giving up when you do that is like in the intermediate middle, right? Like you only have 2 underneath defenders, but again, that's not really what their passing game is. So you play a 3 deep shell and you take away the vertical stuff and force them to like work it back underneath. So, and I do think I think they have some opportunities against the Tennessee line to create pressure. And so I think that'll be taking advantage of that. But on early downs, I think, to me, first and foremost, it starts with limiting the Tennessee run game, and covering up you need to take away the interior gaps, but also cancel out the reliefs, right? Like you don't want to give them easy chunks off of wide receiver screens. Again, like with the run game, it's interesting because they play so many odd fronts. You see like a lot of gap runs. Like they like to use dart, which is just power with the tackle pulling instead of the guard. They'll run counter. But again, like if they get an odd front, I don't know, maybe it'll be more zone. Like it'll be, or an even front, like Ohio State's base, 4-2-5. So that's also something to watch. But again, you got to tackle well because you're gapped out and you got, your DBs are spread out wide. I mean, the good news for Ohio State is they have very good safeties. And so, you see games where Sampson breaks the explosives because the safeties take bad angles, and you don't really get that with Caleb Downs. So that I expect a big game where he's sort of like the queen on the chessboard that Jim Knowles is going to have to use to move around and it should be a double-digit tackle game for him.
Yeah, watching the Tennessee Vanderbilt game, Vanderbilt safeties were both very young and pretty inexperienced, and just constantly biting real hard on play action or the run on the RPO, and just giving Nico Iamaleava just an easy dunk over their head for a touchdown. You're not expecting that against Ohio State on Saturday. One thing that I'm interested in is, you mentioned the offensive line briefly there. That's another thing that's kind of jumped out to me, where Cade Mays, the center, fantastic. Dynamite, fantastic offensive lineman. The guards are fine. The tackles I look at and go, that might be an area to watch. You know, when the dentist kind of goes like, well, it's not a cavity, but we're going to keep an eye on this for the next time. Like, that's kind of where I am with the Tennessee tackles. Like, let's note that on their chart, and then we'll see what comes up on Saturday night. But it feels like that's an area where, if Ohio State is going to get Tennessee off schedule, that's probably where that might come from.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, a lot of focus on the Ohio State offensive line, and rightly so. But Tennessee is not in all that different a boat. They just didn't have the injuries to get there. PFF, or whatever PFF is worth, both have their offensive tackles rated pretty low in terms of, compared to all their offensive tackles across the country. So I agree. I think that, again, it's, on early downs, it's really controlling the interior and resetting the line of scrimmage. And, Sampson's very good, and he'll find holes where there aren't any really, but you just kind of have to control the line of scrimmage. And then, I think, as I said, I think you turn up the pressure on, you want to get him in third and long and then turn up the pressure on passing downs. But that's why I sort of like, a lot of the 3 high stuff as well. Let the defensive line control the line of scrimmage. You have the corners rolled up for the reliefs. You have 2 deeps, you have safeties, and then Caleb Downs can sort of be the eraser in the middle.
One thing I noticed this week as I was kind of going through stats, we have lots of time to think this week, and it's, the coaching staff always talks about, it's dangerous when the coaches have too much time to think during, before a game. That's kind of how it is for media folks as well. It's like, well, we've already watched all the Tennessee stuff we're going to watch. Let's start looking at stats. And one thing that really jumped out to me is Ohio State's defense has allowed 55% of opponent red zone possessions. They're 20 yards from the end zone. 55% of them have ended in scores this year. That is, just to put that in perspective, Army is the only other team that's under 70% this year. No team other than Army this year, which is 59.46%. No team going back to 2016, which is as far back as the stats go, has ever been under 60% other than Army this year and Ohio State. And those are 2 incredible outliers this year. What is it that makes Ohio State's defense so good in the red zone this year?
I think it's a combination of, it's funny because, like, big picture, Ohio State, right, and advanced stats, SP Plus has Ohio State as the number 1 defense in the country. I don't really think they kind of get that respect necessarily. And a lot of it is like, people complain about Jack Sawyer and JT Tumalo and like not creating more pressure, right? But they're really good against the run, right? And so when you get in the red zone, like, teams are apt to run the football. And they're very good at stopping the run, particularly like Jim Knowles, where he can bring defenders down. Caleb Downs and Latham Ransom are very good against the run and coming downhill. Their corners are good tacklers. So, when you get in that confined space, they're pretty tough to score against. And to me, I guess I'd say big picture, like, Tennessee's defense is really good. Like, if you go by just SP Plus, Tennessee's defense is really good. Ohio State's offense is like slightly behind that, but still in the top 5 or so. Obviously the offensive line injuries may, take us some slight off of that, but this is the biggest mismatch, is the Ohio State defense against the Tennessee offense. And so this is really a game where, like, the Ohio State defense has to control things. I think it's a good, Jim Knowles, I think you can tell, is like excited to get out of the Big Ten and play someone different, right? Like, as he said, like, his defense was in fact designed for this, like playing against the tempo, spread out, playing the 3 safety looks, like, that can handle this. You don't get a lot of motion. You're not going to get a lot of shifting from Tennessee. Like, they're just going to spread you out. So this is really the area where Ohio State needs to make hay, is on the defensive side of the football.
Well, I have all week been saying I'm expecting a low scoring game on both sides and probably, a little bit of a rock fight and probably a 60-ish minute game. It sounds like, based on what you're saying about the Ohio State defense, it sounds like you're expecting probably something similar. What are you looking for? What are you expecting on Saturday night?
I mean, I think similar. Like, it's hard for me to, again, I think Ohio State's defense is going to handle the Tennessee, what they do well. I think it's, we'll see how they handle the front up front with the odd versus even front, but I think they're in a good position. If you limit explosives and force Tennessee to drive, you get yourself lined up. I think they'll be in a good position to, get off the field and limit Tennessee in terms of scoring. Offensively, again, I just think that I really do believe that Ryan Day and Chip Kelly learned a lesson from the Michigan game. And I do not think you're going to see that replayed again. I think you're going to see a ton of quick passing on early downs, a variety in the run game, getting Will Howard more involved to try to open things up. But it's hard to see Ohio State really, I could just see drives sort of fall apart because of offensive line issues. So I tend to agree with you. I think it'll probably be low scoring. And obviously, when you look at the various advanced stat profiles, they all sort of see the same thing, like in the, 24-ish to 17 range, or 24-19, whatever you want to. So somewhere in there. So again, as I was always like, if Ohio State could get to 28 points, like that, they should win pretty comfortably, I would think. So that's it, I think. But 4 touchdowns, that could be an ambitious goal. But that's, to me, the key for Ohio State is, again, creating explosives out of the passing game, particularly to Emeka Buka and then Travion Henderson out of the backfield. Those are the matchups inside when you get man coverage that you need to, create some big plays, whether it's angle routes, similar to what Ryan Day used with Xavier Johnson against Georgia, that vertical route out of the backfield. So things like that, it's the goal for Ohio State should be to generate explosives.
Well, will they be able to generate explosives? Will they be able to contain Tennessee's offense? We will all find out together on Saturday night. We will be at the stadium early on Saturday. Should have a full day of coverage for you at BuckeyeHuddle.com and YouTube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. If you are not subscribed to our channel right now on YouTube, boy, you should probably go ahead and hit that button right now. Going to have a bunch of live pregame stuff for you from the stadium. We will have our usual live post-game instant reaction show with our team of analysts, with interviews with Ohio State players and coaches. We usually try and get a little bit of the opposing players and coaches in there as well for you. That's all going to be at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle right after the game. Make sure you hit the bell so you get notified because those shows will sometimes start a little before the game goes final. Just because if we're thinking the game's going to be wrapping up soon, we will probably just get on there and start talking to you about it. So make sure you check out our YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribed. Make sure you hit the bell. Look for us on social media as well, and we'll let you know when that show is about to go live. There's going to be a ton to talk about, win or lose, for the Buckeyes after that game on Saturday night. And finally, make sure you check us out at BuckeyeHuddle.com as well. We're still running that sale, $4.99 for your first month. That first month right now, well, it could involve a aftermath of a first-round playoff loss. It could involve all the way through a national championship game. How is that going to go? Well, it's going to be fascinating one way or the other. We would love to share it all with you at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That will do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We'll talk to you tomorrow.